Providing quality instruction around informational text is a priority of the 21st century classroom. Please join me, Bethany Robinson, as I explore the definitions around informational text, how the Common Core asks us to address informational text in the classroom, as well as how to balance literary and informational text in a way that is fun and engaging for our students.
While educators have made good progress in teaching students to decode, teaching students to comprehend at deeper levels in more complex and academic texts as they move up the grades continues to be a challenge. Researcher E.D. Hirsch Jr.'s studies have helped us to understand that domain knowledge is an important part of text comprehension. Understanding around a topic allows students to fluently navigate text on that same topic, broadens their understanding of vocabulary in that context, and enables deeper comprehension. With this in mind, 21st century literacy calls us to increase domain knowledge for our students. We can accomplish this by ensuring that literary and informational texts addressed in the classroom are content-rich, that our materials expose students to new topics, new ideas, and new arguments outside of what is familiar to them. The Common Core State Standards speak of the need to balance literary and informational texts within the classroom. They reference the National Assessment of Educational Progress's balance of text types, with a goal of 50% literary and 50% informational text being used across the school day in fourth grade classrooms, with an increasing percentage of informational text as students move up the grades. We recognize that the skills and strategies students access for literary text and informational texts are slightly different. To better understand how to address each of these in the classroom, we must first understand the definitions. So how should we define informational text? Let's look at the definitions provided by the Common Core State Standards and the state assessments PARCC and Smarter Balanced. These Common Core Standards and assessments define informational texts as including biographies and autobiographies, books about history, social studies, science, and the arts, technical texts including directions, forms, and information displayed in graphs, charts, or maps, and digital sources on a range of subjects. Let's look at this definition in the form of a table to help us understand this better. So informational text includes narrative nonfiction, other nonfiction, such as historical nonfiction and scientific nonfiction, technical text and/or text features, and digital sources. Each of these we are going to teach slightly differently, as there are different structures and elements related to each one. Let's begin thinking about our instructional goals by getting a closer look at our first three comprehension standards for the Common Core. These three standards our company calls the power standards of the Common Core. They are the three standards that should be addressed in every text students read. Standards 4 through 10 are like helpers that will sometimes assist you in meeting standards 1 through 3. Standard 1 requires students to notice details in the text. These details can be both explicit and inferred details and provide the textual evidence to support students' thinking. Standard 2 asks students to describe or analyze the text. This cannot be done separate from Standard 1. Students will have to be aware of key details in the text in order to accurately describe and analyze the text. Standard 3 requires students to synthesize the text and determine the central idea of the text or the theme. Again, Standard 2 cannot be accomplished without first having done Standards 1 and 3. When students have accomplished Standards 1 through 3, they have read closely enough to determine the overall meaning of a text. We know how to do this work in fiction. When students describe and analyze fictional text, they are describing and analyzing story elements, characters, setting, problem, and events as they relate to the narrative plot structure. They use what they know about this narrative plot structure to help them uncover the author's message or the theme. But how does this work in informational text? Let's begin by looking at narrative nonfiction, examples of which are biographies and autobiographies. Narrative nonfiction also structurally follows the narrative plot. Narrative nonfiction will therefore also include all of the story elements. Characters will not be fictional but will be people or groups of people. There will be a setting to include time, place, and circumstance. There will be problems, including a central problem that develops the rising action. Events will take readers through the narrative plot. Let's look at an example. In Streams to the River, River to the Sea, a biography of Sacagawea by Scott Odell, students will be able to track characters, including people like Sacagawea and her cousin Running Deer, as well as groups of people like the Minatari tribe. Students will also be able to track the setting. Here you see examples of a map and a timeline that students will use to collect around this critical story element. Finally, students will be able to keep track of important events, including the problem. While in complex text the story may unfold out of sequence through flashbacks, students will be able to place important events in a chronological order. By collecting and analyzing these critical story elements, students will be able to accomplish Standards 1 and 3. But students must go even deeper. The goal of the Common Core is not to practice strategies and skills, but rather to use strategies and skills to get to literary analysis, to be able to synthesize the text and determine the author's central message. In biography or autobiography, students will focus in on the main character, analyzing their importance and relevance to our lives today. In Scott Odell's biography of Sacagawea, for example, students will analyze Sacagawea and how she responds to the time, place, and circumstance that she was in. They will come away with the author's central message that Sacagawea responded with strength during hardships, allowing her the opportunity to follow her dreams. This message is revealed in a way that is predictable to the structure of narrative plot. The message begins to be visible to the reader halfway through the text in the rising action and is made clear at the turning point. However, only narrative nonfiction is structured in this way. Now let's take a look at nonfiction. When reading nonfiction, students are asked to collect explicit and inferred details and to get to a point where they can describe and analyze them. In nonfiction, there will also be important elements like character, setting, problem, and events. But there may not be all of these elements. There will be one or more. Also, these elements will not be conveyed through narrative structure. They will be developed through non-narrative structures such as description, sequence, compare and contrast, cause and effect, or problem and solution. Let's look at an example. In Going Along with Lewis and Clark, a historical nonfiction text by Barbara Pfeiffer written in descriptive structure, students will be able to track characters including people like Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, groups of people like the various Native American tribes, as well as things such as the Corps of Discovery dog Seaman. Students will also be able to track the setting. Here you see an example of a map students use to determine the charted and uncharted territory the Corps of Discovery traveled through. Students will be able to track problems across the text, thinking about how these problems impacted the journey. Finally, students will be able to keep track of important events, synthesizing the most important events while placing them in chronological order. However, students must go even deeper. The goal of the Common Core is not to practice strategies and skills, but rather to use strategies and skills to get to deeper synthesis. In nonfiction, this means determining the central idea, central topic, or central argument. In nonfiction, students will look for repetitive patterns in the text, information or facts that continue to point to an overall idea or conclusion. In Barbara Fife's book, students will see a pattern of surprise and new learning as Lewis and Clark are faced with new experiences they did not anticipate. The central idea of the text, therefore, is that through the journey, Lewis and Clark learned many important new things about the West. Unlike narrative nonfiction, which follows the narrative plot line, revealing the author's message at the turning point, the central idea in nonfiction is revealed across the text in a way that is unique to each structure. In this example, Going Along with Lewis and Clark, it is descriptive. Each chapter answers a question about the Lewis and Clark journey, with facts revealed in a descriptive way. The message is revealed as these facts begin to form a pattern. And finally, let's look closer at technical text and digital sources, examples of which include directions, forms, and information conveyed through graphs, charts, maps, or digital sources. When reading technical texts, students will not find story elements. Instead, they will simply be reading information. They will pay attention to explicit and inferred details within that information with a goal of being able to explain and analyze the information. As students synthesize technical text, they will locate the central idea, central information, or central conclusion. The exciting thing is that these technical texts are what bring reading to life. These are the sources we look to when we have a question or we want to know more. If we can't visualize a setting, we look to a map. If we don't understand something, we may consult a chart. If we question the author's validity, we will look at a primary source document. And authors of nonfiction often build these technical texts right into their nonfiction through text features. Let's look at this example from Going Along with Lewis and Clark. The actual text is structured descriptive, but all around that text are technical texts or text features meant to answer students' questions as they arise. In this text, you will find photos, illustrations, maps, charts, timelines, lists, memorabilia, and primary documents, all technical text provided to help students better understand the historical nonfiction. And when your texts do not include these types of text features, these are the fun things teachers can bring in. Whether you are reading fiction, narrative nonfiction, or historical or scientific nonfiction, bringing in technical texts will bring your unit to life. In this example, students who are reading Streams to the River, River to the Sea, look at a postal stamp, a map, an infographic, and watch a documentary, all to give life to the biography they are reading. When teachers approach unit design in this way, they will naturally balance literary and informational text in meaningful ways, fulfilling the goal of 21st century learning to develop reading comprehension through broadening domain knowledge. Thank you for trusting Read Side by Side to bring you research-based teaching practices aligned to the Common Core. Please visit our website and contact us to answer any questions or inquire about our materials and units.